When it's time to take flight, it's reasonable to scour deal sites looking to travel on any of the modern American airlines. But in past days, and some before internet searches, there were other airlines that didn't make the cut. Airlines are racking up big bucks paying for planes, staffing, landing fees at commercial airports. In fact, over 80 U.S. airlines have filed for bankruptcies since the late 70s. Although some lasted decades and others were fly-by-nights, pun intended, we wanted to take a trip down memory lane and hear some of the stories. From fatal crashes to leaving thousands of customers stranded, here are 15 defunct airlines that deserve a second look. Welcome to Bullish, a conversation about money for the curious. Mexicana. With its central hub in Mexico City, Mexicana served as the country's oldest and largest flagship airline for almost 9 decades. Interestingly enough, Charles Lindbergh piloted the 1929 inaugural flight of its route to Brownsville, Texas. Mexicana also set up a 727 flight simulator service at their hub. The airline served the U.S. and Latin America, but due to changing hands several times and looming debt, they went belly up. Their former owner and president lives in the United States as a fugitive after being accused and investigated for fraud. Pan American World Airlines. Affectionately known as Pan Am, many retro-style movies include the airline and their trademarked blue uniform flight attendants. Founded initially as a passenger and airmail service, Pan Am eventually grew to pioneer the use of jumbo jets and computerized reservation systems. Its real claim to fame was its experienced crew and use of modernized aircraft. Unfortunately, fuel prices increased during the 1990s Gulf War, and Pan Am went into bankruptcy the following year. Trans World Airlines. Along with Pan Am, Trans World Airlines, otherwise known as TWA, was one of the big 4 domestic U.S. airlines. Howard Hughes, who was also a philanthropist, filmmaker, and pilot, gained control of the airline in 1939 until it was acquired by Century 21 and Hilton International in the 1960s. Over the decades, TWA filed for bankruptcy 3 times until American Airlines purchased it in 2001. In light of the attacks on September 11th, many of the former TWA employees lost their jobs later that year. Swissair. Formerly the national airline of Switzerland, it was dubbed the Flying Bank due to the company's economic stability. Unlike many other airlines of its day, it was not financially dependent on the government. It was privately founded by 2 Swiss men, a pilot and a photographer. Like many other airlines, Swissair discontinued due to financial situations and the inability to pay debts and purchase fuel. They were also greatly affected by the happenings in New York City during September 11, 2001. Interflug. Besides having a somewhat funny name, Interflug was the national airline of East Germany, with Berlin serving as its hub. In 1972, the airline sustained Germany's worst aviation accident when an Interflug plane tried to land in an emergency, killing 156 people. In 1970 and 80, the airline underwent 2 failed hijacking attempts, and it was dismantled shortly after the unification of Germany in 1991. Monarch Airlines. Leave it to Great Britain to have an airline with this title. 2 British businessmen established Monarch Airlines with the idea of transporting travelers to tourist destinations throughout Europe. At the time of Monarch's founding, other airlines mostly marketed to the rich. Monarch wanted to allow the average person to travel, so it targeted its campaigns towards families. It entered into financial trouble in 2010, which caused several changes until it eventually folded in 2017. At that time, it was the most massive UK airline collapse, which left almost 100,000 clients stranded at various destinations. U.S. Airways. U.S. Air might be an airline that you thought was still in service, as it merged with American in 2015. It got its start in the late 1930s as All American Aviation, which was operated by the DuPont family. The airline went through several name changes and was absorbed by other airlines until the name U.S. Air came out in the late 1970s. Despite rebranding in the 90s and attempted modernization, the final U.S. Air flight took place in 2015 when it took off as a U.S. Airways flight and landed as an American Airlines flight to represent a ceremonial changing of hands. Flybe. Although the name sounds young and hip, this airline got its start in the late 70s in Exeter, England. It was the largest independent regional airline in Europe and carried over 8 million passengers a year. In 2019, it was sold to Connect Airways due to financial struggles. It continued with economic trials throughout early 2020, but the airline ceased operations in March. This halt was part due to decreased bookings and travel bans resulted from the pandemic. It was one of the first travel companies that caused casualties. Thomas Cook. Founded initially as Trans-European Airways, Thomas Cook Airlines was based in Manchester, England, and flew to 82 different destinations. The air carrier went under a compulsory liquidation in 2019 and canceled all flights. As of early 2020, it was still offering refunds and had to close all retail shops. The collapse exceeded that of Monarch Airlines, as Thomas Cook left over 150,000 people stranded at the time of their abrupt closure. For those wondering who Thomas Cook was, his name was synonymous with British travel for almost 200 years, and the uncertainties surrounding Brexit likely caused the company's financial struggles. Carnival Airlines. Cruise ship? Yes. Airline? Maybe. Well, for 10 years at least. We're all familiar with Carnival Cruise Lines, and the company purchased Pacific Interstate Airlines and Bahamas Express to rebrand it as Carnival Airlines. The business initially branded the airline as Fun Air, but luckily that name didn't stick, and no planes bore that logo. The once defunct Pan American Airways then purchased the airline in hopes of reviving the Pan Am name, but that never came about due to economic struggles. Trump's Shuttle. Actor, businessman, president, airline owner? Yep. Well, make that former airline owner, although it was very short-lived. With limited destinations, New York, Boston, and DC, the fleet consisted of 17 airplanes, although that isn't how Trump got its flying start. His foray into the air business was when he purchased 3 helicopters to transport people to casinos in Atlantic City, New Jersey. Trump's Shuttle floundered a bit as it was financially unstable. It integrated with US Air, who is also no longer in service. ValuJet. Nowadays we have Spirit and Allegiant Air, but in the 90s, ValuJet was a deep discount airline of its day. The adage of you get what you pay for reigned true with this airline, as lower prices result in dangerous cost-cutting measures such as secondhand aircrafts, pilots with minimal training, and relaxed state safety standards. Their thriftiness resulted in the FAA wanting to ground the airline. In 1996, ValuJet suffered and never recovered due to a plane crash caused by an in-flight cargo fire. The plane was carrying hazardous, illegal substances which started the fire that caused the plane to kill all 111 people on board in the Everglades. Hooters Air. Let me repeat that, Hooters Air. Although it was a bit unconventional for a restaurant to own commercial planes, the airline flew to 17 destinations with the premise of taking golfers to championship courses. And yes, there were girls on each flight, dressed as they do in the restaurants. Although there were just assistants to the in-flight working crew. Hooters girls may seem like enough fuel to the desires of male passengers, but it was eventual fuel price increases due to Hurricane Katrina and Rita that brought Hooters Air to its demise. Virgin America. Sir Richard Charles Nicholas Branson has had just as many names as he does Virgin-branded businesses. He established the Virgin Group in the 1970s. Branson also founded Virgin Records, Virgin Galactic, and his newest venture, Virgin Voyages, which is an adults-only cruise line. Despite its success, Virgin America was sold to Alaska Airlines in 2018, yet Branson currently co-owns Virgin Atlantic Airways with partners Delta and Air France. Whoa Air. Whoever named this airline, well, whoa. Just whoa. With a crazy name in all caps, this airline began as a budget flight alternative to Iceland. Based in Reykjavik, WOW flew to 27 destinations, mainly throughout Europe, North America, and Asia. In 2018, the airline was scheduled for a takeover by Icelandair, yet the acquisition never happened due to the company's financial distress. The business went bankrupt in 2019, leaving many passengers stranded, although the founder has been talking about resurrecting his once successful airline.